Welcome to the Environmental Due Diligence podcast by LightBox, the podcast dedicated to environmental professionals. At LightBox, we are at the forefront of delivering solutions for commercial real estate intelligence. Today, our host, Alan Agadoni, SVP of Environmental Due Diligence Solutions at LightBox, and a panel of experts discuss results from our 2024 PFAS Due Diligence Benchmark Survey. We welcome our panel, Georgie Nugent, Environmental Division Director at McFarland Johnson, Jon Kitchen, Principal at Civil and Environmental Consultants, Inc., and Victor DeTroy, National Practice Leader, Due Diligence Services, AEI Consultants.
Hello, everybody, and a special thanks to Georgie, Jon, and Victor for taking time out to join us today. It's great to see you all again. Welcome. Jon, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Great. Thanks. Victor?
Good. This is Victor.
And Georgie.
Hello, this is Georgie. Good to see you all.
Excellent. And for those of you who are not familiar with the panel and what they've done in the PFAS due diligence arena, you're just not looking hard enough, because on our own website, Environmental Insights page at lightboxre.com, you'll find hours of technical presentations on PFAS due diligence in aviation with Georgie, Jon on landfill operations, and Victor and I have had some interesting conversations about Phase I ESAs in commercial real estate. We thought it would be a lot of fun to have a constructive conversation in an around the horn style chat where we'll take a look at some of the early results and get some expert feedback on the recent PFAS due diligence benchmark survey that we just wrapped up. I want everybody to note that's listening that we're preparing a blog with an analysis of the results. If you subscribe to our content, we'll keep you posted on that. And the next installment of our higher risk property series that you won't want to miss, it's on PFAS due diligence on consumer product and manufacturing sites, which is a very big topic, and I think you'll all find extremely interesting. And with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today in more detail. I selected some questions, and I think they fall into three basic categories. First, and probably for the last time with this particular version, we'll see how environmental professionals and their clients are applying the ASTM E1527-21 Phase I ESA standard and how it's impacted their operations, including whether or not they've added PFAS. Secondly, we'll talk about industry efforts to integrate PFAS into standard environmental due diligence projects and what environmental professionals are saying about the level of client awareness and if they have concerns over that. Or so how are clients feeling about things as well as the environmental professionals? And then finally, we'll review how PFAS risks are being reported back to the CRE marketplace and have there been any impacts on deals so far? So I think, there's more. There's one more question I've asked the panel to take a look at and think about today. And that's, do you think the due diligence industry has reached a consensus on how to conduct, interpret, and report the results of PFAS due diligence for commercial real estate? In speaking with the panel, we know that many industries like aviation and landfills have been studying PFAS risks for years, for in some cases, even for decades. So can we leverage that experience and apply it to commercial real estate? I think that's the big question. I think we're going to look at what's been happening since early 22 when we first started asking questions about environmental professionals' interest and awareness and knowledge on the new standard, which at that point was the new standard E1527-21. And we asked this question now in three different timeframes: early in 22, later in 22, when more things were happening and things were being adopted by EPA and such, and then just recently. And so let's see how things moved. The most popular response in early 22 was nothing. I'm already compliant at 45%. So this is, again, the question was, are you following ASTM 21? And if so, what are you doing differently? And we got 45% of people in early 22 saying, we're good. In 2024, that answer only polled at 15%. And now 71% of EPs say that they updated their reports. So I'm interpreting that to mean that in 22, people were answering the question as, what were my priorities right then in early 22 versus what they are today in 2024. And we see that maybe early on, some of the environmental professionals and risk managers were in a bit of denial about what it was going to take to do PFAS due diligence and all the things that they were going to need to consider. I think that's moved along a little bit, and they realize that there's been substantive changes and new practices might be in order. So that's what I was getting from it. Let's start with Georgie. What do you see in that survey data, and how impactful do you see the adoption of 1527-21? There was a decision to add emerging contaminants and PFAS. So where are you sitting on all that? And what are you seeing from your perspective?
I like to start this off by a favorite quote of mine. How do we know where we're going if we don't know where we've been? So the standard was released in early 22 and was formally approved by the EPA in February of 23. So at that time, PFAS was not listed federally as a hazardous substance, and that didn't occur until April of this year, right? So on a state level, prior to 22, we saw certain PFAS compounds being listed. New York, for example, became the first state in the nation to regulate 2 PFAS compounds, and that was in early 2016. And the new ES standards clearly document this and speak to it under X610, and they're identified as emerging contaminants. And it's clearly stated if a Phase I is performed to satisfy both state and federal requirements, it is permissible to include the analysis and discussion of these substances in the same manner as other non-scope items under consideration. The results that we're seeing there is pretty consistent, in my opinion, with what we're seeing with the standard and then the regulatory environment in which we live. If and when such emerging contaminants are defined to be a hazardous substance under CERCLA, then they'll be evaluated within the scope of the service and the practice.
Yeah, we asked a couple more questions related to that. One of them, Jon, was we had 37% indicated that they included a dedicated PFAS section in their report. And some said it just depends on what the conditions are, and they do it more on a case by case. Some people are writing side letters. We've seen that in the past, and we know sometimes lawyers direct that. In your view, is any of those approaches better than the other, or is this just what happens early on when we're trying to find our way through this kind of situation?
I think it's going to depend, and maybe early on or even into the future. This has been an issue of debate even within my own firm, right? I'm in the camp of you don't need a section, but I like it from a standpoint of reminding all of our practitioners to think about these things. I would say the more popular opinion within my own firm was you don't need a section. You don't talk about every contaminant of concern. The exception is something like PCBs. We do generally tend to have a separate PCB section because there is some unique characteristics to what we need to consider there. PFAS definitely is different in what we're considering, right? We're thinking about things we weren't thinking about before from a standpoint of risk. So my opinion is it's probably worth a mention, but it's certainly not something that's required.
Yeah. And Victor, this kind of goes back to also the way that we've managed other contaminants throughout the years. But this one seems to have its own flavor, right? Because we are in transition in many ways in the regulatory sense, in just getting more knowledge about how things work. How do you stand on that? Is it more helpful for your clients to have a section they can hone in on? Or is it better just to treat it like any other substance?
No, and yeah, I know one of the survey comments was funny. It was like, we don't have a section for benzene or toluene, so we're not going to have a PFAS section. And
yeah.
I guess, like Jon's saying, technically you don't have to, but a lot of times Phase I's aren't done to just the bare minimum that needs to be done. Like they're done for lenders, and lenders don't care about, obviously they want their borrowers to have circle liability protection, but they have to have the secured creditor exemption. So they're looking at it from a risk perspective. They want to make sure their collateral is financially sound. So they usually add stuff onto their scope of work for most consultants. Hey, technically, you don't have to have a dedicated PFAS section for the standard, but we want you to have one. And I think most major lenders at this point, it's in their scope of work. Not only do they want a PFAS section, some of them want a separate emerging contaminant section. And it's tricky too, because like PFOA, PFAS are hazardous substances. Then it does get confusing because we also want to talk about those as well, because things like car washes and commercial laundries We didn't really call those out in the past as being like high risk, but certain types of industrial operations, obviously industrial operations raise a red flag depending on what they're doing. Now we have to look at it a little bit differently. Okay, maybe they did some sampling, but did they include PFAS at the sump collection point and stuff like that? So I think generally it is good. Like Jon was saying, we've been definitely hammering that home for a while. You want to have a separate section. And lenders want to know specifically, are you looking at this? Because you aren't required to have a separate section, but they want to know because they have their own internal risk guidance and they're checking things off. And so they don't know if did your consultant evaluate PFAS, yes or no? And they look at your report and they don't know. Then they're like, geez, did this consultant do a good job for me? Yeah, I think most of the time, even if you're doing it for investor, it's going to end up on a lender's desk most of the time.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there that this is really about helping everybody, including the writer and the reader, organize their thoughts better at this point in time when organization of thoughts and pulling together all these little pieces of information from different places is challenging. Whether in 2 to 5 years that we'll do it that way, who knows? But at least for now, it seems like there's some consensus on that. And before I leave this section, I'll just say we also asked some questions about whether or not consultants are seeing pricing changes or any accommodation being made for what they're acknowledging is some additional time spent doing some of these things. And I think the survey data says that for those who are putting in extra effort and calling it out and making sure that they are covering it properly, they are getting some recognition that there's some need to increase pricing or to cover that cost. And I think that's always going to be a challenge in our industry. We've been asking this question for 20 years. And when it comes to phase ones, and there's always a split mindset on that. But I will say, and maybe, I don't know, Georgie, is it in your experience and what you're seeing from other consultants that if you're making the extra effort and you go to your client who cares about this stuff, they will accommodate some additional pricing for you?
Yes, in my industry, absolutely. I think overall, the pricing has increased. We're assisting clients with very important business decisions and helping them evaluate their risks. And environmental professionals shouldn't undermine their importance or charge less due to competition or other areas or reasons. There's more data that we now have to go through and we have more access to as well. And it takes more time.
Yeah, I think there's a split on that question as to how much more time it takes, but that's really going to be case by case. In some situations, there's an investment in research and there's an investment in reporting.
Regardless of the changes in ASTM and what it costs to complete the report, I think the market for providing expert advice is definitely growing as an opportunity due to PFAS, right? There's a lot of demand for somebody that can say, what does this really mean for me from a risk perspective? You can call it a wreck, you can call it not a wreck, depending upon circumstances. To some degree, it almost doesn't matter because the risks involved, the actual risk is sometimes quite large, or could be perceived as large when maybe it's not. So I think that the market for expert services has definitely expanded.
Yeah. As far as price, I don't know. I wish prices went up according to how much time we spend on stuff, but I think it just might be cost of labor is a little bit higher.
Like I said, this is a question that goes back decades and it won't be resolved today. But I do think we've seen at times some recognition that this is a challenging topic, that for people who value good information on this topic, they're going to need to spend some time and money to make that happen one way or another. So I think we can probably agree on that and go on to part two, which is, this is where I think some of the responses we got in this one are even more interesting than the first one, because some of these questions we haven't asked before. For example, Jon, I'm going to go to you on this one, but we asked, what is your client's level of interest in assessing PFAS risks? And we provided a rating range from 1 being not interested to 5 being very interested and 3 being somewhat interested. And interestingly, we got a kind of a smooth bell curve in there happening where most of the people are around 38% said their clients are somewhat interested, but over 40% said either 1 or 2, and 1 or 2 being less interested or not interested at all. And only 6% said very interested. So this raises a good question. And that is, with Jon, with you and Georgie in aviation, for instance, you're spending a lot of time working with people who have a lot at stake, who have potential for big business impact if they don't manage risk properly. And what do you think is driving, though, the relatively low interest numbers in the commercial real estate arena? And maybe that's what we're seeing here. What say you on that?
I'd say two things there. One is, I wonder if you replace PFAS with anything else, you certainly have a number of your customers who aren't really interested in risk anyway. They're doing this because somebody told them they had to, right? So you may always get a bell curve. I do think with PFAS, you do have more people who are on that lower end, right? And some of it is perception, and we really don't know how to perceive risk. And that risk is very uneven. What state are you in? And what does your business do? And are you in a drinking water area? Are you not in a drinking water area? All of these things impact risk. And I think that's, again, where the environmental professional has to do some education on how big of a deal these particular risks are. And many of our clients, fortunately or unfortunately, haven't had that education yet.
Yeah. And we see people coming up to speed through opportunities like this, right? That's one of the reasons why we've been doing this. And I know you all are out there because it's important to get people start building that consensus. Victor, this particular question got a lot of really good comments, people wanting to share their all levels of interest and frustration and everything. What were some of the ones that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because, like Jon's saying, like some investors, they just want to get the deal done. Brokers definitely want to get the deal done a lot of times. But lenders are the ones that are probably on that very interested part of the bell curve. I'd say like the big lenders or the lenders that have gotten burned by something are the ones that are interested. Some of the smaller lenders might not be as interested because they might not quite know about it yet. They might not have gotten burned. A lot of times, I guarantee most of the big lenders who've had many deals done, they've probably run into a situation where they've had a really expensive PFAS issue they had to deal with. It was a nightmare and they wised up pretty quickly. And so when you talk to them about it, they're not like, what is this thing you're talking about? Why am I all of a sudden spending 8 weeks to do a phase II when it's going to cost me twice as much? They know. And they're already like, we want to know the risk here. But it's a hard sell to a Joe Schmo investor who's just like, I've been doing this for years. I've never had to deal with this. Why is the turnaround time so much longer, more expensive? And it can be definitely a harder sell. That being the case too, I think some lenders are really almost freaked out that it was just going to kill every deal. And I think Jon and Georgie were talking about, it does take expert advice to talk people off the ledge. Like, anytime someone maybe handled PFAS at some point, it's not automatically like this huge issue. With saying, do we need to be interested in PFAS? I think lenders just want to know, are we thinking about it? Are we talking about it? Because then they can check it off their list. They don't want to basically stop a deal for any little minor issue. They want to make sure there's enough substance there to really have to look at it.
Yeah. And lenders have a different risk profile in some senses due to the way the laws are constructed anyway. So there may be, that may be account for the lender interest a little bit more, but there's still plenty of, and there's a lot of people out there who maybe feel like there's not a driver for them because they are on the front line. They're not receiving PFAS. They're not manufacturing PFAS, or at least they don't know that they're manufacturing PFAS. We'll get into that in our next webinar. But Georgie, any of those comments stick out to you as speaking to what you're seeing out there?
Yes, I'd say from an aviation perspective, if this question was asked to people in the aviation industry who deal with property transactions or due diligence, you'd have higher skew to very interested. I'll start with that. The comment on clients being still interested about the risk because they don't know what to do about it, if it's identified, holds true. In the aviation world, if you have a new tenant coming onto an airport property to occupy new space, they want to know the baseline conditions of what was there, especially if they are going to be using AFFF or if it is currently in their firefighting systems and not now occupying a hangar. They want to know the baseline. They can't put their head in the sand anymore.
Yeah. We asked a couple of additional questions along this line. that I thought got some super interesting responses. And Jon, one of them was, we asked, do you always include PFAS in the scope of your ESAs? And it wasn't a trick question, but it was put there to make people think about it. Are they considering it in every circumstance, just like they do other contaminants? And we had almost 70% report that PFAS is in their scope somewhere. So they're thinking about it. Now, I hope the other 30% will catch up soon, but 70% said they're thinking about it. And then we asked them to estimate the number of projects that had PFAS data or conditions. There was something like, 60% said less than 10% of their projects had PFAS data or conditions. So this might be another thing that's going on, is that you want to cover it, but right now the amount of information out there doesn't help too much. Jon, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's probably evolving quickly as we move forward, and depending upon what region you're in too, right? Certainly, I'm in the New England region. Certainly, it's maybe been a little bit ahead of the game in terms of recognizing PFAS as a concern, and it's also still evolving quickly. Other regions, maybe it's going to lag a little bit.
Yeah, good point, because there's no question about the states that have been the most proactive are the ones where we're seeing the most information and the most action. So that, and that there's a dozen states right now, maybe a few more that are very active, and a lot of them are in the Northeast. So that makes a lot of sense. One more question before we move on. And this one I put in there just for you guys, because I knew you'd love it. And we asked, if you include PFAS in your Phase I ESA, what types do you include for consideration? So this gets down to now, we're thinking about PFAS. Which PFAS? Do we have to think about all of them? Do we think about each one of them in a different way? This is an interesting possible question. So I'm going to go to, let's see, Victor, why don't you take this one?
No, this is a good one. So it's funny. It reminds me of, there was a webinar at the EPA virtual conference recently by California Water Board. And they did this whole study where they opened up these investigative orders for airports and waiting facilities. And it was all basically just to do a study. It was like a absence presence test for them. And what they found was that there were obviously PFAS at all the kind of ones expected, all the types of facilities. But they also found that there are these, what they called ultra short PFAS at really high levels in a lot of the facilities. And so they're revising some of the EPA method, I think the 1633, and doing like a whole revised sort of recommendation on how to get those ultra short PFAS. And that sort of me is at the cutting edge of research at this point, where we're still figuring out, because first of all, we're trying to figure out what's there. We don't even really know with some of the really short stuff. And then do we know what's the actual toxicology? Are these even a risk? Because some really short PFAS are even in pharmaceutical, in medicine that we take. I think when you get to that point, that's going to be a really difficult thing to suss out. So at this point, we do, I think, generally look at it as a class of, hey, are there certain types of operations that lead to PFAS contamination? But that being said, we do put a focus on PFOA and PFOS and the phase out, when they came in, what was the phase out period, stuff like that. You can say all right, so we have these operations that are high risk, but they occurred after the PFOS phase out and manufacturing phase out. And maybe there's some lag in material still used after 2002. And then the PFOA phase out, which kind of took a little longer. We're saying, hey, look, for instance, we had a brand new manufacturing facility that was there from 2019 to present. If they were using PFAS, we know it would have been at least the shorter chain compounds. So we still look at it. We still consider it. Obviously, the risk is different because they're designated as surface hazardous substances. But I want to get out ahead of this stuff. And the EPA has put out the proposed rule to add those other people. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we do, long answer short, we do try to include them as a class, but we don't get into the detailed, what's the European Union definition or whatever.
Yeah, at that point, that's probably a diminishing return right there. But so I think this is another one of those answers that kind of depends in the sense that you have different regulatory restrictions and structures and considerations for different classes and types of PFAS. So it makes sense that you might look at them in the final analysis in a different way. But I think the number one answer to that question was at, I think 40% said they look at all PFAS and for starters. And then when it comes to classifying them or speaking to what to do about them, you start breaking it down a little bit. And Georgie, on that one, I'll just a quick answer on this one is I want to go on to the next part, but we also asked about whether or not people are reporting PFAS conditions as RECs or BERs or something else. And I think the number one answer was, it depends. There was about 25% that said REC, 10%, less than 10% said BER. I'll just put it to you. Does it depend on what you call it in a report?
I think that there was one comment that said it was considered a BER until it was added to the Circular Hazardous Substance list. I think, to me, it's certainly a REC, especially now in light of the new federal standards. I do want to touch a point, though, with the previous question with regards to considering all PFAS compounds in your scope and also in your findings. It needs to be mentioned that there's 5,000 plus types of PFAS compounds. I know we were discussing scope and out of scope items earlier in this discussion and talk about out of scope items. So does that mean you have a fire suppression system, you go and need to evaluate the MSDS? And a lot of times with those compounds, they're trade secrets. So it won't necessarily list out the type of PFAS compounds that are in the AFFF. And then in the aviation industry, there are still airports all over the United States using AFFF with PFAS, with different types of PFAS compounds. So when you're evaluating properties on and adjacent, down gradient from airport properties, that really needs to go into your findings and into consideration for what your recommendations are for your client.
And we're going to get into this a bit more in the next webinar, because when we're talking about consumer products, it really gets quite, there's a wide variety of compounds, to say the least, and researching them is quite difficult, but it can be done. And we're going to talk about some strategies for doing that. And I think that'll probably be a good segue then to our next section, which is on ESA risk reporting. How do you label known or suspected PFAS conditions in your Phase I reports? And about 25% said REC, 5% said BER, and the most popular answer was, it depends at 60%. So Victor, how does that correlate with what you're seeing and hearing from other environmental professionals? Does it depend?
Georgie nailed this one. Basically, there's two substances right now per the ASTM standard that can even be considered a REC, PFAS. So if there's a release or like a release of those two, it's a REC per this ASTM standard. All the other compounds, the thousands of other compounds, if there's a release of those, they're still technically non-scope. So it can't be a REC per the ASTM standard.
Question for you then, there's also salts and isomers of those. And then there's precursors. Is a precursor to one of those compounds a REC or not a REC?
That's a great one. Yeah. And that's great because we thought about that a lot too, because if you have a precursor, and in case anyone who doesn't know what a precursor is if you're baking a cake, so if you say the cake is the bad guy, John's saying, what if we take the flour, egg, sugar, butter, whatever, mix it up, and then it's in the pan? What happens is that once it goes into the oven, once it gets released in the environment, it turns into a cake, the equivalent of putting all those ingredients in the oven. It turns into the hazardous substance. So at that point, I would say it's a tricky one, but I would say, yeah, the way I see it is a release of I say long chain and precursors, a release of those, because if you release a precursor in the environment, it's likely to result in a release of PFAS. That's how I see it. I'm curious what you guys.
Anybody have a different opinion on that?
I think what it leads to is just from a practical standpoint, that's why you look at the class, right? Because yes, there's things that maybe we wouldn't be able to call a REC and would have to consider a BER, but practically you're looking at a class, right? I rarely, just to try to draw an analogy, if I'm concerned about semi-VOCs, I'm rarely saying I'm concerned about one semi-VOC, right? I'm like, or metals might be a little different. But so I think you look at the class first. And then you're really into phase 2 or something more many times before you're even drawing distinctions. There's definitely technical distinctions, but I don't know that we're always drawing them.
Yeah. So I think we're going to be assisted by the fact that we've dealt with precursor chemicals before in other scenarios and situations. So maybe there is something to be learned there. We've at least established through all of the ASTM training that's been done over the years that a REC is a very specific term of art and it is only to be applied to those things that the standard says is a REC. And so we can rely on that a little bit. And the rest is just, I don't think you're going to get a lot of pushback in a report where you're detailing out this level of nuance on PFAS from anybody. You may get a pushback that, hey, you're going a little bit far there, but you're not going to get pushback on whether it's a REC or a BER. I don't think.
You obviously haven't met many attorneys.
I set that one up. All right. That's a good one. Let's go on to the next one. The next question, because some of these, we got some question with some great answers, but let's look at question 18, which was, what would you estimate is the approximate percentage of your Phase I ESA projects that include a recommendation for a Phase II to further investigate PFAS risk? And right now, the answers are not surprisingly pretty low, with only about, the most popular answer was over 50% said less than 10% of their projects have any kind of recommendation for Phase II or further investigation on PFAS. And I'll throw this out to the panel. Is anybody else seeing anything different, or is it pretty much still rare to have a project go that direction in the big commercial real estate arena? John?
I'll chime in that I don't think over the past several years, it's become such that it's not rare. You're not doing Phase IIs on many sites also, right? A Phase II isn't a foregone conclusion, right? I see PFAS being in the suite of contaminants being investigated at Phase II or and more commonly. So I might say 50% of the time we might be up to now, or maybe it's 30% of the time, but that's of the times you're going to Phase II, which might only be 20%. So you're going to get to that 10%. So I don't actually think the 10% is that low. And if I had to guess, I'd probably be more in the 10 to 30 category.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think, like John's saying, you hopefully, ideally, you're not recommending a Phase II for 50% of the sites you're assessing, unless you have a really gnarly class. I guess for Georgie, if you're doing airports, maybe it is higher for you.
Yeah.
But for just general commercial real estate, it's a lower percentage already. And it can be, I won't lie, it can be a tough sell sometimes to people. If you're saying, hey, this dry cleaner has a release, let's do a Phase II. Okay, no problem. We got it. And you want to include PFAS too. Wait, what? I don't want it for a dry cleaner. Why am I something like that? And you're like, is that too conservative? And so I think it's also like a gauging in the industry. Like, where are we in terms of the risk? Is that too conservative to add PFAS to this? Is this really a concern enough where we think there would be a release? And so there are certain cases like car washes and dry cleaners is a big one I'm seeing a lot, where like, do we really need to recommend a Phase II for that? And I think there's a lot of pushback on it. Do we really have enough information to know that there is a likely release? There's a couple of studies. It's hard to really say definitively, we know this is going to result in a release. It's easier with a big industrial site to say that's got a huge wastewater system that, there's probably a release here, but these other sites, it's tricky.
I skipped over a question I wanted to ask you guys about. So let's talk about this one next. I characterize this one as the least fair question I asked in the survey, but I put it out there for a good reason, because I wanted to see where people's heads were at on interpreting what I would call the big data dump that occurred in 2023 when EPA and a lot of states went out and said, okay, here's everything we have about that has the word PFAS in it, or that has any of the 16,000 substances in it. So we got this massive amount of information, but it wasn't always specific. It wasn't always even in the ballpark of knowing whether there's actual or known PFAS risks. It's just in the potential area. So we got a lot of information coming in, and I asked, in your professional opinion, do you consider an industrial property listed by EPA as a facility that may have handled PFAS based on industry code only to be a recognized environmental condition? And the answers were something like around 20% said yes, about 35% said no, and 45% said it depends. So what are your guys' feelings on that? Georgie, you're probably next up. Do you want to opine on that one? Give us your thoughts as to whether that is just an indicator of where we are in the road to consensus?
Yeah, I guess it goes back to that other conversation we had with regards to what is defined as a REC, right? So just going by industry code alone, are they still using compounds that have PFAS in them? Or is it a historical use that first needs to be determined? A lot of the comments were based on those factors, depending on certain circumstances. And it depends also on other research.
Yeah, I can see the struggle though. People, and Vic, you probably get calls from consultants or from your clients saying, hey, the only thing in this entire report that said I might have PFAS is this EPA listing that just says, yeah, you're in the industry that may use it at one point in time 20 years ago.
I have a lot. We could do a whole podcast about it. Because I deal with this quite often.
Yeah.
I think it's from the EPA, their ECHO listing. And basically they sourced it by just saying, here's some NAICS codes and does it match the industry? And I don't even know how far back they go because I haven't seen it go back super far. I think it's from maybe the last decade or two at most.
Yeah, it's a couple of decades at least. And there might be some areas where it goes back a little bit further than that, but not much. Yeah,
I'm strongly in it depends category on this one because we've had sites where it's a plating facility. We already consider it a REC. And then we found out it's also has this code. So that's going to be considered. We want to assess PFAS too. And I've had cases where it's a small print shop, no drains, it's not something that would be, we don't think there's a release or release. Say that, based on all these various factors. So just because it's got this code attached to it, it's to me saying this is a potential RIC generator is the way I see it. So if you have a potential RIC generator, if you have a RIC generator listing, does that automatically mean a REC? No. Does it sometimes mean a REC? Yeah, sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. So I think that's the way I see it.
Good. Yeah. So it's a call to action, basically call to action, maybe need a little bit more research, maybe you had to dig a little bit deeper on this one.
A lot of consultants will only look at the database listing, looking at PFAS. And I think early on, that's all we had. So I think a lot of consultants, our very baby first steps into PFAS was we're just going to review the database because we don't know any other data. And then as more research and information came along, we added sections all right, in addition to that, we're going to look at the history of the site. We're going to have a whole checklist and things like that. I've seen cases where consultants are only looking at the database and they're missing. We've had clients say, it's not listed in the database, so how could it be concerned? I was like, it was a plating facility 50 years. Okay, so maybe it wasn't listed in the database, but you still have a really high risk here. Like Jon was talking about earlier, using the value of consulting and using expertise in these areas is important.
All right. Jon, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I would just say I'm surprised that it wasn't 100% people saying it depends because I think it really does depend. And I think that listing, I think it's not to be taken with a grain of salt, but maybe just a couple of grains of salt, right? It's a listing. It's really the context and the other information that matters, I think, way more than that. It's an opportunity to not miss the ball, right? It's an ability to throw out a red flag and say, deal with it now.
I've got one more question I wanted to go over before we wrap it up. And that was this one about whether or not PFAS conditions are impacting commercial real estate deals that environmental professionals have been involved with. So we asked that question. We got a little bit under 30% said yes, and about close to 70% said no. And so I thought we would maybe throw that one around the horn. Georgie, you want to go first? What's this say to you? Are deals being impacted? Will they be impacted? And is that just the way it goes in Phase I land?
I'd say they're impacted in the fact that there's more discussions about it. There's just more communication on what this means for the risk a new tenant or developer has. But at the end of the day, property are still going to be developed and the real estate is a hot item. eventually just going to go through with the deal. So it's all a matter of the risk tolerance.
Yeah. And when we asked a follow-up question, we asked people to say what ways were PFAS impacting deals. We got a lot of people saying, oh, nothing special. But almost 30% say it killed a deal. The deal was basically set aside. And then for the last 6 months, there's not been a lot of transaction volume or momentum. And you throw PFAS in there and it's going to impact some deals. We also hear reports of escrow contract resolutions. That makes sense. Insurance in some cases, I understand, still might be available for lenders. I don't think you're going to see a lot of pollution liability insurance covering PFAS anymore. Victor, what are you seeing out there as far as impact on deals and maybe solutions versus just walking away?
Yeah, there are some insurance policies that will cover it. You just have to make sure they're specifically covering it. Yeah, I definitely see it. Even if you recommend a phase 2, sometimes that kills a deal. So I think it's similar with this sometimes. I've seen ones where it's just, they're like, hey, we don't have time for this. It's going to take 8 weeks to get this, and our deal is supposed to close in 2 weeks. We're done. So you just might see more extensions on deals and things like that. But yeah, I've seen all this, really. I think there are times where people just say, we don't want to deal with it. We don't care. We'll get a waiver for it. There are times where they just fight you tooth and nail over it. And then there are times where like, yeah, we want to check this out. We want to know. It's basically the way it's been so far is a phase 2, you're going to get pushback a lot of time.
Jon, what is this? What are you seeing out there?
I agree with everything Victor said and have seen deals that have fallen apart in some cases, but you've got all sorts of buyers out there with different risk tolerances. So it's no different than any other contaminant of concern. The same deals that have fallen apart, we've seen another buyer come in and snatch up the property. First buyer says they can't even quantify the risk associated with it. It's so large. And then somebody comes in 2 months later and buys the property. Knowing all the same information.
Same as it ever was.
Also, I think, too, is a lot of people thought the sky would be falling when this, PFAS, the circle of designation. I don't think it's like all of a sudden killed every deal out there. If anything, it's just there might be a few more recommendations, but it's really not, I don't think, substantially different.
Yeah, I think especially in the context of the big world of commercial real estate, right? There's just so many properties and opportunities where that's not going to come into play in a major way. And the rest will be sorted out over the next few years as the regs settle, lawsuits determine which way the laws are going to go. All these other things that have to happen. So it's all part of that journey. And so that's a good segue into our closer here, which is I asked you guys to think about whether we are on the road to consensus or not. Yes, we are, of course. How far are we? What's missing? What do we need to make this a little bit less of a bumpy ride? And so I'm going to start with Georgie on this one. Where are we on the road to consensus?
I certainly hope we're on the road to consensus, and it seems that we are. I think at the end of the day, we all want what's best for our industry and also for our clients and the decisions they're making. PFAS is a really complicated issue. I can't stress that enough. You'd find it in the most mysterious of places. If you look at some studies that are being done and the sampling that is taking place, you'll find it in places that you wouldn't imagine. So we need to just, first of all, realize that and understand that it will be impacting our industry more and more. I can't wait to see what the results of these questions will be, say, 3 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing I'm thinking is that it is, especially as I'm working on these higher risk property series, we still have a lot to learn and know. There's people out there with that knowledge in many cases, but it hasn't made its way into the lexicon of phase 1 for commercial real estate yet. And there's probably some things we will be very surprised to learn down the road, just like always happens. Jon, what are you thinking on this one?
Yeah, I think things moved very slowly until the EPA designation, right? So we're much less than a year in. Things have picked up. I think give it another year, we'll be there. So I think we're still at the beginning, but we're moving fast now.
It does take a while. Look at how the whole vapor intrusion thing, it took people a while to understand that was a real risk. And I do think more studies would help people finding out 50% of the time, this type of operation leads to PFAS contamination. stuff like that. And it's going on. It's happening now. And also the more consultants do phase twos, the more they'll know, hey, how often do we actually get hits here too?
I have nothing to add. You guys did great. Thanks for coming on and sharing your opinions and thoughts and knowledge. It's super helpful. And I think that's how we're going to get there. We're going to get there through efforts being made across the industry by the government, by NGOs, by organizations like ASTM. There's a lot of folks out there working on this right now. And I think we're making progress and we'll continue to. We just have to keep communicating, keep sharing. This will be okay. I want to thank our panel. Georgie, thank you. Jon, Victor, always a pleasure. And thanks to everybody who's listening in. As I said earlier, we're going to be presenting the complete findings of the survey in a future blog post. So subscribe and let us know if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future topics by contacting me or your LightBox EDR representative. Thanks and cheers, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Environmental Due Diligence podcast by LightBox. Tune in next month for timely coverage of news and issues impacting commercial property due diligence. This podcast was produced by the team at LightBox, your trusted source for commercial real estate intelligence. Access this episode and all of our future episodes at lightboxre.com/podcast or your favorite podcast streaming platform. Until next time.